Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. In July, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham announced she had removed the new Education Secretary, Dr. Karen Trujillo, after 6 months on the job. A spokesman for the governor's office said critical reforms in the department were not advancing as needed. The governor is scheduled to join us for a conversation in mid-August, the earliest date that she was made available. Today, we are very pleased to have with us for the entire half hour, Dr. Karen Trujillo. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah. Wish it was under different circumstances, but it's good to be here.
I wish so too. I wish so too. But I want to give you a chance as we start our conversation to talk about what you were told about this decision. And we know that that was not directly from the governor, but from one of her associates.
Yes. Well, on Monday afternoon, I was asked to be in the Chief Operating Officer's office, Teresa Casados. And, I had done 2 speaking engagements earlier that day, so I didn't really go in thinking that anything was amiss at all, and went in and sat down, and she said that the governor had decided to go in a new direction and asked if I would resign. And I said, no, I stand by all of the work that we've done in the last 6 months. I'm incredibly proud of everything that we were able to accomplish. And so they asked me to turn in my things, and I went and packed up my office and came home. So it was definitely a surprise to me because I never had a one-on-one either with the Chief Operating Officer or with the governor to express concerns. We had just put together a 6-month op-ed with all of the accomplishments that we had during my tenure. So I was very proud, and I still am, and I stand on everything that was done. And I think the message both internally and externally was extremely positive. The energy in the building had shifted. We had just come out of a tragedy. We buried a valued employee, Ernestine Romero, on Saturday. I moved into my place on Sunday, and this happened on Monday. So it was an interesting week, to say the least.
And of course, you told others that you were shocked by this decision. What is your assessment of what exactly happened? What's going on?
I don't really know, because I know that the direction that we've taken the department is very, very positive. We were able to implement most of the legislation that was passed during the legislative session. Like you said, we were able to get a huge investment in education. And I think really, for me, the most important part was changing the narrative of education in New Mexico and what it is to be a teacher, really trying to encourage people to think about education differently, really putting out a positive message of what is possible, and encouraging students to consider education as a career. As we look at the need for early childhood education teachers, bilingual education teachers, CTE, that's a huge push. You have to build that excitement in people first, and then you can move the ship. But it took a long time to get where we are, and 6 months is not a very long time to fix everything. It's going to take years. This is really just a foundation year. But the team that's there is tremendous. Where we're all, they still are, but all New Mexico educators, lifelong educators. And, I had an opportunity to partner a lot with the different secretaries working on initiatives. So I'm sure those will continue, and it'll just be something that I'll look on from the sidelines.
Yeah. Well, and I know 2 major issues that have been issues for a decade in New Mexico that you tackled right away were teacher evaluations,
yes,
and also school ratings.
Yes.
So we can talk about those things, because I know that those were accomplishments that you
No, those were huge. And I think when we went in, those were two of the things that were a big, huge priority of the governor. We were able to assemble an assessment task force after traveling all over the state, getting input from both teachers, communities, students. You know, I was able to sit in on a couple of those sessions, and just very logical ideas that came from the field. And that was the idea. You know, you collaborate with people that are in the trenches doing the work. Then we were assembled a task force, and they came up with, you know, different ideas. We sent it out to an RFP, so those companies will start responding now, and a new assessment system will be put in place this coming year, so that's very exciting. Did the same thing with the teacher evaluation, partnered with national facilitators, again, went across the state to get input from teachers and communities. The task force will convene August 10th and 11th, and they'll talk about a new evaluation system, one that is fair to teachers, one that has high standards, and one that really will be able to measure and look at the qualities of a teacher that matter. Because in the past, it was really very much based on scores and test scores. That was very detrimental, not only for the teachers, but for the students, and a lot of things that were happening in the schools. So if you were looking at, for example, science in the elementary school, if all of the evaluation for both teachers and schools was based on math and reading, then you had a heavy push for math and reading, and science just kind of got left to the wayside.
Yeah.
So really trying to identify how to balance everything so that our students get a high-class, high-quality education in New Mexico.
On those issues and other ones, I know one of the things that you have been vocal about, and you showed in the 6 months that you were on the job, was the need for leadership in the education department to travel around the state, to meet with educators, because we have the second highest level of departures by teachers. The teacher retention rate is the second worst in the country, only behind Arizona. Nearly 1 in 4 teachers every year, according to a recent analysis. Tell me about the importance of that for the next person in this job, to go out, to see, to talk to people, make sure they feel that they're heard.
Hugely important, and I feel like that was just a big part of my job, so I just felt honored to be able to go all over the state. Lots of different districts that I hadn't visited before. We have a beautiful state, and I always knew that, but now it just most definitely is ingrained. And as far as the teacher turnover, some of the things that we did to try and address that were really changing some of our key programs. One of them is called Teachers Pursuing Excellence, and in the past it was reserved for teachers who were in quote-unquote failing schools. And we shifted that so that it was to support teachers in their first 5 years, because that's when you have the turnover, that's when you lose them. They have to have that level of support, really talking to districts to say, how can we figure out what our mentoring programs look like? As we are doing teacher preparation and going through pre-service teachers, making sure that they're in the classroom sooner. So we just funded 4 teacher residency programs, which will get teachers into the classroom long before their final semester. And that's important because you have to know what you're getting into. The other piece is making sure that you're providing support for alternative licensed teachers, because those are second career folks that are coming in, and they need probably as much, if not more, support. So those were some of the initiatives. The other thing is really trying to make sure that the compensation is comparable, that you have collegiality in schools, that you are also working with leadership in schools and districts, because teachers don't necessarily just leave the classroom for financial reasons. They just, it's a community. And I think the message that I was able to give, and when I was interacting with teachers saying, you know, I thought I was going to retire, but after hearing you speak or after seeing some of the things, you've gotten me excited again. And so, you know, if I did that for a handful of teachers in my tenure there, then that's a huge accomplishment as far as I'm concerned.
In talking about concerns, I know you're aware the governor's office cited the challenge of getting districts to adopt the K-5 Plus program that extends the school year by 25 days for elementary students. Thoughts on this and how this can be done?
Well, one, I think that was just kind of having to find something, having to find a reason. It was like, oh, well, K-5 Plus, we'll talk about that. When we were going through the legislative session, when we were talking to superintendents, districts, legislators, it was clear that some of the requirements, the way the bill was written, were going to be extremely difficult, especially for some school districts to implement. Primarily those in the rural areas where you just have maybe one elementary school. So if you look across the state, what we were trying to do is find a little bit of flexibility and make it a little bit easier for school districts to adopt. Because one, it had to be the entire school, so all the kinder through 5th grade teachers, at least one teacher at each grade level had to participate. Two, those teachers had to follow the student cohort that they taught in the summer into the school year. And there were a few other provisions, but those were the main two. And it's not part of a teacher's contract, so a lot of it goes into negotiation with the union if you're a union district, and teachers don't have to do it. Students don't have to go. It's not a mandatory program. So when we were trying to find those waivers or recommending vetoes, they were not taken into consideration, and we thought, it's going to be, from what we're hearing from the field, we have we're running the risk of leaving money on the table. So the department right now is really spending a lot of time. Our goal was to spend a lot of time getting districts ready so that next summer, because it takes a little bit of time to get there. So you see districts that were able to implement, like Las Cruces, Deming, Gadsden, they went all in, but they had a history. Yeah. They had done K-3 plus, they had done K-5 plus, Hatch, another one. So those parents and communities were used to that. Districts in the northeast corner really expressed a lot of concern because they ranch all summer. That's part of their culture, and they said we just can't ever do that. Our teachers are burned out, and our families and students, they work in the summer. They work the ranch, they farm, they do whatever they do. So another 25 days for some is difficult. So I'm hoping that in the next legislative session there will be a little bit more flexibility, because it is one research-based intervention for extended learning, but there's lots of others that also show tremendous gain for students.
Many others, and of course a great need in our state. And I want to touch on another issue, socioeconomics, which often gets overlooked.
Hugely important.
USA Today recently released a study showing that the Las Cruces area has the second highest child poverty rate in the nation. And I want to look at these numbers. They are really stunning, even if you've heard some of these before. The child poverty rate for Las Cruces, according to this study, we're talking about more than 4 in 10 students. The adult poverty rate, of course, one of the highest in the country, and that affects children, nearly 1 in 4 adults. Our median household income is more than $20,000 less than the national median household income. We have nearly 1 in 10 families in extreme poverty, 8.7%. And in terms of early childhood education, 3 to 4-year-olds enrolled in school, it's a little more than a third, which is a number I know that I'm sure you would agree we need to increase, more
definitely.
Kids enrolled. One of the things that you talked about, and many others have talked about, in fact, I interviewed some time ago the president of the National Education Association, who is a big advocate for this. That's community schools. We have one in Las Cruces, Lynn Middle School. The city has gotten behind the idea with support and funding. Tell me about what a community school is and how this can help with some of the gaps created by our socioeconomic issues in Las Cruces and around the state.
So Not only in Las Cruces, I mean, this is an issue, like you said, it is across the state.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a very high poverty state. And it all has to work together. I mean, it's a matter of economic development, investment, lots of different partners working together to come up with a solution. And I think that's the beauty of community schools. Because in most of our communities, the school is the hub of that community. Everybody is there for games, you know, parents are dropping and picking up their children. And yet when people that are in need have to go and find support, you go to this agency for one thing and this agency for one thing and that building for a different thing. So the idea of a community school is like, let's figure out what the needs are of our community and how can we serve them. So at Lynn Middle School, like you're aware, they have the program where the dental students from Doniana branch come and they serve the students on the school grounds. There's a clothes bank, there's a food bank, there's GED classes, ELL classes for parents. So trying to go to a community, figure out what the needs are from the ground up. So it's not coming from the top down and saying, well, we think that this community needs X, Y, and Z. It's going to them first and saying, what is it that you need? How can we support you? How can we fill those needs and make the school the hub of the community again? Student-based health centers is another huge, a very important piece. Another one that goes along with this is the social emotional learning for our kids, having that behavioral health care available, having counseling available for our kids. It's an exciting, it's research-based, it's nationally shown that there are results. And when we look at it as an academic intervention, that's not really the ultimate goal. It really is giving those students what it is that they need so that then they can focus on learning. Because if they're coming in hungry, if they're coming in without the proper clothing, if their parents don't have what they need at their home, then it's very difficult for kids to focus on academics. So a community school is providing that wraparound service, that holistic education. Shared leadership is another huge component. And then culturally relevant curriculum so that kids see themselves in the curriculum, in the classroom, and they have those models of success that they can follow.
Yeah, so important.
It's exciting. It really is a very exciting venture, and my hope is that somehow I end up working in a community school setting or really advocating for that because I truly believe in it.
Yeah. So folks who are watching this, many are aware that the legislature this year provided a lot more money for education, nearly $500 million. But we're hearing that after years of neglect, this actually wasn't enough money, that a lot of this money had to be spent on salaries, which are still below market rate. So I want to give you a chance to talk about funding. This involves a lot of different things.
A lot of different things.
But you know, we start with salaries for a very good reason. It's very dramatic. Our minimum teacher salary was increased to $41,000 a year. But as you know, just down the road in El Paso, this fall teachers in the El Paso Independent School District will be paying about $50,000 a year. So even with the increase,
right,
New Mexico remains about 20% behind in attracting new teachers to the classroom. So that's one example. You know a lot more about this in terms of all the other things that funding is needed for in New Mexico.
So I think, like you said, I mean, there was a huge investment in education. We're very excited about it. The thing was that a lot of it did go to the teacher raises. There was a mandatory, the increase up to 41, 50, and 60 for level 1, level 2, level 3 teachers. The other piece was that it was also a 6% increase for other employees. Because when we look at the education system, it really is everybody involved in the system. What they did not consider was that there's compression issues. So for example, if you have a level 2 teacher that's been teaching for 5 years and a level 2 teacher that's been teaching for 15 years, and they both go up to, let's say, the 50,000, how do you reward that teacher that's been there for longer? So some ended up getting more like an 8, a 9, some 11% raises just because of where they were at. And so, you know, the mathematical model, hopefully this coming session, they can adjust those things a little bit. because we've heard back from districts say, well, a lot of that extra money that I got for at-risk students, for all of these different types of programs, I ended up spending a lot of it on salaries. So hopefully that'll be something that can be adjusted. I think there's still a push to increase the salary levels even more this coming session, so I hope that happens. It's hard for border communities, I think, more than any others. So here in Doña Ana County, you know, we compete with that El Paso market. On the eastern part of the state, they compete with the Texas market as well. You know, Colorado, Arizona. So when you look all around at the border communities, it's difficult. So we end up with a lot of retirees from one state coming to the other and then back and forth. So the benefit of that is you get experienced teachers in your classrooms if they've retired from Texas and they come and teach in New Mexico or vice versa. But we do have to do something about that. And districts, you know, some have bonuses, or if they're a hard to recruit area, you can do, you know, a STEM signing thing where a teacher would get like an extra $5,000 or those types of pieces that fit together. But it's difficult, and it's going to take, like you said, it was a lack of investment for a very long time, and it's going to take a while to build it up. And the other thing, one last thing, but the other thing I think that we also need to focus on, that it's really hard for a 20-something to focus on, is that New Mexico really does have a very good retirement system. So if you are able to stay in the classroom or, you know, in the education system somewhere, you know, the retirement really does bring a lot of benefits. That's just a hard sell for a 20-something.
Yeah. And but it's good to mention too, in terms of making sure that that system remains solvent, because while some would call it a good system in terms of its eventual payout, it also nationally teachers and other educators pay more into the system than most places, dramatically higher than the average in the country. The increase in funding is partially the result of a lawsuit against the state, and it deals specifically with at-risk students. Most folks watching know that there's a shortage of teachers, partly due to the salary issues we just talked about. They may not realize that there's an even bigger shortage of bilingual teachers, and that there's a need for that in New Mexico. If you can talk about that briefly.
Huge. So I think the three biggest needs are bilingual teachers, special education teachers, and STEM teachers. And bilingual, very, very, very critically important. I think there's studies that have been done from Dual Language New Mexico and the Transform Education folks that were involved in the lawsuit that show, you know, there's tens of thousands of students that are bilingual that are not being served by a TESOL endorsed teacher or a bilingual education teacher. And it's a need. And thankfully, like New Mexico State, which I'm super proud of being an Aggie more than anything, transformed their elementary education system so that now students that go through and get an elementary education degree, they're either automatically get a bilingual or TESOL endorsement. So they're doing something to address that. Really trying to figure out how to have students consider that as soon as they enter into the field. So when we were doing Educators Rising, and I was doing, you know, I've been doing that for a couple of years, that's recruiting high school students to become teachers. That's something I'm more proud of than probably anything else. But when I talk to them at the conference, like, okay, how many of you are bilingual? How many of you speak Spanish or a native language? 65% of them would raise their hand. How many of you have considered being a bilingual teacher? And they just kind of like, what's that? Is that a... So starting from that age to say, no, take advantage of that asset that you have. Being bilingual, knowing Spanish, knowing your native language is an asset. Take advantage of what that is and pass that on to the next generation.
And of course, usually when we talk about this, is the way I introduced it as an example, we think of the need for more bilingual teachers because we have students who are learning English as a second language. But a second part of this that doesn't get talked about very much is how wonderful it would be if in our culture in this country, not just in this region, but all around the country, we placed a value on being bilingual, because there's no doubt about it that employers do, if you want to just look at it in that way, I think there's a larger context here too, that when you learn another language,
it's an asset.
It's an asset
Yeah.
for you. You also appreciate other cultures and diversity, and it's something that we don't talk about enough.
And I think that was part of the messaging as well, is that it's not just being bilingual, it's being biliterate. So really looking at that biliteracy seal, which we have in New Mexico, that honors students and that asset that they have. So it's really bringing that in and making sure that kids from a very young age, kindergarten, first grade, that they speak Spanish and you're like, that's awesome, so let's make sure that you maintain that language. Or students in dual language programs that aren't native Spanish speakers, but they, by the time they're 5th, 6th grade, they're bilingual. And hopefully that they continue that so that by the time they graduate from high school, they're biliterate. And you know, my husband owns a business here in town, and that's one of the first things. It's like, no, they have to be bilingual. And it's hard to find, but we have to honor it as an asset and not a deficiency in our kids, and I think that'll flourish.
I only have a little bit more than a minute left, but you mentioned also special ed, and I think this is important to understand. There's a shortage, and there are sometimes situations where new teachers are being put in special ed classrooms, which experts would probably say this is not a good situation.
And it isn't, most definitely, because it requires a different level of training. I think one of the other accomplishments, if you don't mind, over the last 6 months is really focusing on special education this coming year that will end in a special education summit, because we have to look at all of those different issues. What are the parent rights? How are IEPs being conducted? Do teachers understand what the paperwork and the liability and all of the things that go into serving that student population, because they can succeed and they can excel. They just have to have the right amount of support. And you know, I believe that the team and the department will assist districts in getting there, but you have to put experienced people where you need them most.
Okay. Dr. Karen Trujillo, thank you so much for coming in today and talking about this very important issue. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday, it's morning edition from 5 to 9, Fresh Air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.